All right, my English teacher friends, even the lovers and haters of poetry, Kristian Kuhn coming at you again, affectionately known as the Bob Ross at composition. And I got a little bit of some gamification for you in the forms of Plato's Play-Doh discussion, in which we're going to take a look at 5 poems by Billy Collins. I've been doing these author series, so in the YouTube channel, you have them for Tupac, Mary Oliver. I'm going to cover slews of poets and show you how I gamify my discussion. Here's the impetus behind this. I just finished writing an article for the English Journal entitled COVID Killed the Classroom Discussion and the Gamified Anecdote. So I don't know about you guys out there in YouTube Nation, but when my students returned after the lockdown, classroom discussions in the form of like Socratic Seminars, Harkness Discussions, Fishbowls, they ain't happening. So kids were not talking, they were not participating, and the old thunder just wasn't there. So I got deep into my arsenal of gamification. And for this video, I want to show you how I gamified these 5 poems so that we could do an author series of Billy Collins. And what I'll do is this, is in the description below, you can find a download link for all the questions that you're going to see here. I'll demonstrate this for like 2 poems just so that it's not like super tedious. So in the link below, you can download the slides that you're going to see here. And again, as always, I say this, please subscribe to the new channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross at composition. We are growing exponentially, just to clip the 20K subscriber mark, and we're keeping it strong. So tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your students about this channel, and please spread the word far and wide. So let me tell you the 5 poems that I selected, and they're the my 5 favorite poems by Billy Collins, and he's one of my favorite poets, so I could have gone in a million different directions for this, but I call it the Poetic Fifth, in which we study 5 poems by an author, and then I choose a 6th poem to model how to write an essay about it, like an FRQ1 style essay, and the kids can't use the 6th poem for their essay, all right, because I want to avoid the mimicry and the stealing of my gusto. So the 6th poem they can't use, and the 6th poem is entitled Silence. I'll show you that at the end of this video demonstration. So what we have on docket here are the following 5 poems: Introduction to Poetry, On Turning 10, Shoveling Snow with Buddha, Nostalgia, and Another Reason Why I Don't Keep a Gun in the House. So I'll walk you through the gamified process for 2 poems, and then the last 3 you can just download the slides and get a sense of what's happening here. So let me tell you why exactly I gamify discussion. I've kind of already alluded to this, and I'm going to talk about it a lot in my article that I have in the English Journal. So I find in traditional classroom discussion modalities, a couple of things happen that preclude it from really being dynamic. And one, at least in my classroom, is that I have a couple of kids that monopolize the conversation. You know, that kid that sits on the edge of his seat and he goes, ooh, I know. You know, I usually have a couple of those kids in my class. And then the other kids just kind of blend in with the wallpaper and don't really earn their keep, and they just kind of steal our air, and they're there and they're not actively participating. And I have no idea if they're taking anything away from the Fishbowl, the Socratic Seminar, or the Harkness Discussion. So I don't in particular like that. I also find in those discussion modalities that I'm very prone to do something called wagon wheeling. And I got this term from Theodore Sizer when I was a graduate student at Brown. And a wagon wheel looks like this, right? Teacher poses question, it goes to one student. Student tosses the answer back to teacher. Student poses another question, comes back from different student. So on an analogous level, it takes the shape of a wagon wheel, right? The questions are just the spokes going to different students and comes back. So it's very teacher-centric. And I know my district kind of discourages that. We're moving away from such teacher-centric learning. It's not not good pedagogy, apparently. So in the gamified modality, a couple of things happen. The students are the ones that are generating the questions, which is super cool. And I have to model how to do that extensively. So early in the academic year, the questions primarily are mine. But at this stage of the year, I'm recording this around President's Day weekend. My students are pretty good at questioning a text all on their lonesomes. And then the gamification method, it has speaking quotas. The students have to participate. They have to engage. And there's many ways in which you can tackle that. So let me show you some ways that I gamify this. So in my classroom, I have a tic-tac-toe board that looks just like this. It's magnetic. It attaches itself to my whiteboard. And I split the class into two teams, X's and O's. Each student on that team writes a series of questions. They submit them to me. I take the best. And then if I find that the groups didn't get to like the heart of something essential in the poem, I'll insert my question into the mix and we just toss out the questions. And if the O team gets it right, they get an O. They can put it anywhere on the board. Same for the X's. So simple game of tic-tac-toe, and usually per poem, we're posing anywhere from 7, 8, 9 questions. So tic-tac-toe works perfectly for that. And in the Facebook groups, you may have seen other gamified approaches that work really well. I know in the AP literature group, lots of teachers have embraced Jenga, and I use a colored Jenga in my classroom in which, the purple, the blue, the green, the yellow, the red has different value points, and there's a little dice, you spin it, and you have to pull that particular color, and we gamify it that way. Super fun, very cool. We usually do 2 teams. You can split it up into 4 teams if you want. I also do Connect 4, where we just have a yellow team and a red team, and have at it that way. And Connect 4 it takes a little longer to play. So if you have a lot of questions, Connect 4 works really well. Another one that I use quite often is Hungry Hungry Hippos, and I'm just giving you a flavor of how you can gamify here. So you have an orange, a yellow, a pink, and a green team, so 4 teams, and the amount of marbles that you gobble determines the amount of points that you earn for answering the question correctly. So if you want exacting rules and protocols for that, just email me and I'll send it to you, but be imaginative and have some fun with it. So for the Billy Collins poems that we're going to take a look at here in just a second, I did a different one called Go Fish. I am in a port of entry for U.S. immigration in a town in which I teach. So I have a lot of English language learners, and therefore some, reticence and some reluctance to participate in classroom discussions. It's just a language learning thing. So what I did for this was I had a small group discussion, and I put kids in groups of 2, and they played Go Fish, and we basically gamified point value on the game structure of Go Fish. I bought the cards at Dollar Tree and spent like $8, and the kids had a blast doing this. And again, the questions are pre-made before the discussion starts. And then I had to write some questions as well because my students struggled with a few of these poems. So I'll show you 2 of them. And the first one is Introduction to Poetry. This is poem number 1 of the series of 5. And I'll show you the questions that I came up with along with my students. So here's number 1. In order for this poem to make sense, one must first understand who the them is referencing. Who is them? And students asked that question, and it was a really good question because in order to ascertain the meaning of the poem, you got to get to that level of basic understanding. And they were sort of overlooking pronouns and not understanding who the narrator was, and the fact that he's a teacher, addressing students. And if you don't have that basic comprehension, the poem's going to go right over your head. Number 2, the poem is juxtaposed to several natural elements, such as a bee's hive, light, a mouse, water, etc. Great observation. So what? How does this observation intersect with the universal truth of the poem? And if you've seen my other Play-Doh discussion, you see my students doing that all the time. I say that constantly in my class. Great observation, so what? So kids are like, yeah, there's an anaphora in that rhetorical piece. And I'm like, great observation, so what? So identification is only half the battle. You got to get to the construction of meaning. So number 3 states, compare and contrast the imagery associated to the reading mannerisms of the they versus the I. And that's kind of the crux of the whole poem there. Number 4, explain how the last 4 words of the poem arrive at the universal truth of the poem. And number 5 states, the stanzas that don't end with a period transition with the or conjunction. How does this singular word create meaning in the work as a whole? And this one's my question. None of my students picked up on that. My guys struggle with syntactical reads a little bit, and I teach them the parts of speech and how they operate theoretically and technically in poetry. But it eluded them in this particular poem, so they're like, all right. So we had a big discussion about the single word or when we dissected this poem. So poem number 2 is perhaps Billy Collins' best known work on turning 10. And I'll show you the questions for this, and then I'll just give you a cursory overview of the remaining 3, and you can download the questions if you want to. So question number 1 for on turning 10 is, with regards to the it Collins is referring to in the first line, he juxtaposes the pronoun to a list of natural illnesses. How does this observation make meaning in the work as a whole? All right, good questions. Number 2, 3 of the natural illnesses are linked to the spirit, psyche, and soul. With regards to the universal truth of the poem, why is this relevant? I guess you could also say, how does this construct the meaning of the poem? How does it get to the universal truth? Number 3, in the upper third of the poem, second person narrative point of view is introduced. Great observation, so what? So that was another question that I posed. Kids didn't pick up on that. All of a sudden the poem switches and it's you. And there's an intent behind that. There's a meaning behind that. And I wanted them to grapple with that syntactical flair of the poem. Number 4, Collins creates a dichotomy between light and dark imagery. Unpack how this operates in the poem. Get your nose in the text to support your remarks. So that's very important. Like 10 is dark and the single digits are cast in lightness. Collins enumerates what it is like to be 1, 2, 4, 7, and 9. Compare contrast to the title of the poem. What's it like to be 10? And it's another question that gets at the light and dark imagery. But you could also look at some of the figurative language in it as well. Number 6, we are told that at the cusp of turning 10, that this is the beginning of sadness. What is represented by this? And I love that question, and believe it or not, students came up with that one, and it's such a juicy question. Love it, love it, love it. So when kids are left to their own devices, sometimes they can amaze us. And number 7, lastly, what does light signify at the end of the poem in contrast to the darkness of blood? All great questions. So I won't show you all the questions for the other poems, but just know, as I said earlier, you got Shoveling with Buddha is poem number 3, and you can see here that there are, let's see here, 8 questions for Shoveling with Buddha, and then Nostalgia is poem number 4, and we have 4 juicy questions for that poem. That's probably the easiest of the 5. And then one of my favorite Billy Collins poems of all time, Another Reason Why I Don't Keep a Gun in the House. And you can see you got question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that. And let me explain what I do when we get to the end of the 5th poem. We crank an essay. So we've thoroughly unpacked the poems. Let's write the essay. And in the Tupac video and the Mary Oliver video in the YouTube channel, you can see my writing workshop for the 6th poem that I referenced earlier. So poem number 6 is Silence. And I am going to write a model essay based on this. in which I demonstrate for students, a la Bob Ross, how to pull the strings of my heuristic. So it's literary analysis, so we know that we're going to invert the thesis. And I'll model that like 3 times, just exclusively focusing on the poem Silence. And then from there, I'll move into the body paragraphs, and we use a heuristic called the syllogistic method. And I'll show them how to do the first premise, the second premise, the conclusion for, both body paragraphs. And then we use some sentence stems to tag a conclusion on the end of the essay. And what I'll do in the coming days is I'll record the video for Silence, so that if you want to run Pilly Collins as a unit in your classroom, you have my exemplar essay so that you could host a writing workshop. So that's it from here. Happy teaching, happy writing. If for any reason you need to get in touch with me, drop me a line at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I'm doing a lot of stuff this coming spring and in the coming weeks with Perfection Learning, Applied Practice, NCTE, College Board. So you can stay abreast of my comings and goings at teachinghowtowrite.com. And we'll post things in the Facebook groups for webinars and things of that nature. They're all free, so you can come and join us and hopefully learn a thing or two. So that's it for now. I will keep the writing workshops and the gamification workshops coming in the days, weeks, months, years to come. Be well.